What's up, IT friends? We are going to do it. We are going to discuss a topic that I always avoid discussing because I get so angry about it. It's not a negative topic. I just get riled up about it. We're going to talk today a little bit about the service manager who still works tickets. We can actually take a step back for a minute. Any service-based business that's going to have a management role that is directly in charge of measuring, managing, and optimizing the quality and efficiency of the service delivery, whether that's at an auto body garage, an MSP, a cabinet making workshop, a restaurant, any of these things. We all have something that is functionally the same as a service manager. And I think this is where everybody gets tripped up, and we're going to talk about this idea first. In every one of those examples that I give, and if I keep giving additional examples, I think the one thing is, as sort of lay people who are not in those industries, we would all agree, we assume that person has a relatively significant knowledge of the actual process being executed by the employees. When I say that, I don't mean that they understand the playbook. Of course they understand the playbook. There's an assumption that they have in-depth knowledge on how to do the work themselves. Let's expand on that example for a minute. So you bring your car to your local dealership, service center, where you speak with a service manager there. And the service manager takes down very knowingly and knowledgeably all of the things that you're reporting need to be resolved with the car, maybe offers up a few thoughts as they do a visual inspection, and they send it off to have one of the mechanics work on it. And when you get it back, that service manager may often, in fact, also be the person who explains to you what was done and why, and any costs and parts. And their ability to talk on everything that happened implies the fact that they have an equivalent level of knowledge and probably skill to the mechanic. We see this all the time. Restaurant manager, maybe the manager of that cabinet shop I talked about, and really whatever, like any type of skilled service delivery like that, there's a certain assumption that we tend to make that even if we don't directly expect that manager to be doing the work, well, of course they probably could. And I think that's what happens a lot in the MSP space. We take that B2C experience where we have been the customer and we just assume that's how it works. And so the common trend I see all the time in many, many MSPs, especially MSPs that do not already have a sort of ingrained pedigree of a management structure in place, is, well, we find our best or most loyal technician and we promote them to be the manager, right? I mean, that makes sense. They've been the best employee. Everybody else already looks up to them. They know what good looks like. Let's put them in charge of everybody. And we'll get to a minute why that may not be the best strategy all the time. Now that they're the manager, I mean, that's great. And you certainly do expect them to do management things, and they'll probably do a little bit less ticket work. But I mean, they were your best tech, so they still have to work tickets. And all too common what we see is not that they still have to work tickets or maybe projects, but no, they're really in the ticket queue actually working a normal day's amount of work. And if we take that back to our auto shop analogy, that means that the service manager who's supposed to be there to check you in, oversee everything, explain your bill to you, call you to talk about any parts, maybe even work with the parts department to source those parts, is also supposed to be the one who is turning the wrenches and, swapping out your brakes or changing your oil or whatever. When you think of it casually, yeah, okay, whatever, that makes sense, that's fine. Because at a small shop where there's maybe one or two mechanics, they are de facto performing that role and they're the mechanics. But think about that back in the context of that auto dealership that actually has a proper service department, that actually has multiple bays, that actually has multiple mechanics, that can service 5 to 6 customers at a time, that has a scheduling and dispatch system that allows them to plan the work ahead of time. You notice how all these things are very similar to we have your MSP. Do we really expect that service manager to be the one turning the wrenches? This is one of those interesting situations where, regardless of how you answered that question in your head, it comes back to not can, but should. It's entirely possible that you have a technical service manager who has a ticket working background, who is capable of working the tickets. It's also entirely possible you have a service manager like me who had a very limited technical background and knows a little bit about a lot, but probably can't really turn those wrenches in working service tickets. It's not a matter of if they can work the tickets. It's a matter of if they should work the tickets. So this brings us to an important concept that I definitely don't talk enough about, and I'll make future videos on. But in the MSP, we've traditionally had some sort of set of metrics we measure employee productivity by. Of course, the tried and true one is utilization. I have made a video on utilization before and why I think utilization is outmoded, outdated, and unnecessary. But we've got utilization, or we have billability, or we have how many resolutions they've done in a particular day, or how many cases worked, like all of these work performed metrics. And of course, casually, it makes sense to apply that to the manager, right? I mean, because the manager, as we just said, likely was one of those employees that you promoted. That's how they were being assessed previously when they were a great employee. Why would we stop assessing them that way? I mean, all we've done is just slightly change their responsibilities. And you're not a bad MSP owner. You understand that they got to do some management stuff. So maybe if before you expected, 80% of their day to be filled with those metrics, maybe you're being reasonable. You only expect 50% of their day to be filled with them. Now that's a whole 30% of the day that you're letting them do management stuff, right? Like how many of us does that describe? And it describes most of you. I'll answer that for you. And so the problem with that is most of the metrics a traditional MSP uses are capacity-based metrics. And if you think about it, when we're running a support service that's customer-facing, we really have two things we need. We need capacity, but we also need availability. And they may sound similar, but they're not. So if you think about it, capacity is the maximum amount of something that a container can contain. So an employee working an 8-hour shift has 8 hours of capacity. That's the maximum amount they can contain in that 8-hour shift. That doesn't necessarily mean that during those 8 hours, they're available, because here's the thing. Availability is the quality of being able to be used or obtained. So it means, yes, they might have capacity of 8 hours, but are all 8 of those hours, or if we think about it practically in minutes, are all of those minutes available or able to be obtained at any point? And the answer, of course, is no. They're not. And so for a technician working tickets, this largely isn't a problem, because we can do one of two things to solve for this. In an MSP that has some sort of dispatch or scheduling or some sort of queue where you work things in a certain order, well, there you go. You only need to be available for one thing at a time. And those things go in a specific order that have been more or less aligned to your capacity. So if you had an hour-long ticket, I could work 8 of those in a day if I did nothing else. And if I did them in order, I only need to be available for one thing per hour. So that's pretty straightforward. And if you're an MSP that does more, live intake, first call resolution, then you really only need to have capacity that corresponds to the volume of that intake. Now, that's a little less efficient, but you solve that problem by just adding bodies, and if that's your MSP model and what your clients like, that works too. Nothing wrong with that. So either way, this is pretty straightforward. But a manager needs to have availability, because the thing is, situations that require coaching, mentorship, leadership, quality control, training, escalation, like all the things you expect a manager to do, we can't plan those things the same way we can service tickets, because they just kind of happen, and they don't happen consistently. If you have a really, really, really dialed in, well-managed MSP, they happen even less consistently, because you're probably just managing to exception at that point. You need a manager to have the ability to be available at any point during that 8-hour shift. And that's where having them work tickets starts to become a problem. I'm not saying that your managers are never going to work tickets. There would be really busy days sometimes where our dispatcher, we'd be flat out, something was going on. Maybe there was like a, SSO outage, and our dispatcher would ask me, hey, I have these, because she knew I was stupid. I have like these backup check tickets, or I have this patch reporting ticket, or some other sort of low demand but necessary task. Dean, can I please schedule you for 2 hours today to just take care of those so I can free that employee up to do something else? That would sometimes happen, and I expect that would happen at any reasonable MSP. And I think that there are plenty of times where your management, especially if they were the lead tech, is going to be involved in an escalation or handling a client issue on behalf or in addition to an existing employee, or may occasionally, unfortunately, be the only one in the room that can work a certain ticket. I'm not saying it won't happen ever. What I'm saying is that's not their primary responsibility, their secondary responsibility, or even their tertiary responsibility. And if you're not approaching your service management staff with this mindset that it is objectively not their job to work tickets, you are asking them to have both capacity metrics and availability metrics sandwiched together and just managed. And the thing is, that's not really possible. So there's a small percentage of people that might have heard that and said, well, I did that when it was just me at the MSP. When I was the only employee, I managed both of those. To which I would like to give you the very flippant answer of, no, you didn't. You think you did, but you didn't. And it's an important call out, because most MSPs were started by a single solopreneur who did do everything. So it's easy to go back and think, I used to run the service department and work all the tickets and do everything else. And you were responsible for everything, but you didn't actually manage capacity and availability simultaneously, because it's literally not possible unless you have a cloning machine. It's not possible. And I don't think any of the MSPs that I've ever met of the prestige, it's not possible. What you did have was 100% authority and accountability to make any and all decisions. And all of that authority and accountability was in here, so you always knew why you did it. So the difference between a solopreneur doing it versus a manager is a solopreneur is able to drop balls, knows the rationale why they dropped the ball, has full authority and accountability to drop that ball, and the ability to communicate all of that to any stakeholders. Your manager doesn't have that. No manager has that. No manager anywhere is ever going to have that level of authority and accountability to rationalize everything, understand it, have the entirety of the business in their head, reprioritize tasks, and potentially work till 8:30 p.m. at night to make up for it. That's only you as the owner. That's important, because once you have that realization that, oh shit, even if I tell them they have that power, they don't actually have that power, right? Like, you don't actually have that power. So even if I tell them they have that power, they don't actually have it. And a manager cannot simultaneously manage being 100% available and having the dedicated capacity to work tickets as a daily responsibility. That should be an eye-opening moment for you, that I need to make a choice here. Is this employee going to be a lead technician that advises, escalates, and works tickets and maybe helps the room, like in a managerial capacity? Or are they a manager? And if they are a proper manager, they are not out there turning wrenches. Yes, I understand, like I said, there will be occasional times they will turn the wrench because somebody has to keep the business running forward. And there will also be times they will turn the wrench if they were a technical employee previously, simply to remind the team the right way to turn the wrench. Not debating that, but that is going to be exceptional. That is not a normal thing. That cannot be part of their normal metrics. So as an owner, if you are thinking that I want to bonus, incentivize, or somehow otherwise hold my service manager or ops manager, director of service, director of ops, director of projects, and project manager, whatever the fuck title you're calling this person, if you're thinking I want to somehow still keep them on the metrics I use to measure my techs, and I want to bonus them, incentivize them, or just simply hold them responsible to those metrics, That's not reasonable and it's not going to work. Having said all that, I do want to make sure that I am not saying that doesn't mean that your managers cannot and should not enter time and have a timesheet and submit that on time. Everyone in the building whose cost of goods sold needs to have a timesheet submitted. It's just simply the manager's timesheet isn't going to be a bunch of service tickets entering time. It's probably going to be some catch-all ticket or some other type of entry that you've arrived at in whatever your time entry system is. Should they be accountable for where they are during the day like everyone else? Absolutely. Should they log their lunches like everyone else? Yes. Should they log their meetings? Yes. Should they log any client facing meetings, anything like that? Yes, they should. Anytime they're doing something that is client facing, it absolutely should be captured in a ticket. Thing is, you should be looking at that as the owner when you're reviewing their timesheets, because of course you're doing that, and you should be saying, why are you spending so much time on client-facing stuff? I hired you to manage the team, not to work on the team. And that's the important distinction. Now, if you have, let's say you accept all that, you're on board, you're with me, and your manager, who was a tech, wants to lead from the front, which is a wonderful style of management and leadership. I totally get it. Leading from the front, very quickly, for those that don't know, kind of a military style idea, which is the general is at the front of the army with his own sword out, who is not only saying to the army, follow me, but then is also likely getting into battle and sort of displaying what he expects from his troops, right? That sort of military idea that I am leading from the front. I'm not back in the command bunker. I'm out there with you in the trenches, getting blood and mud on me and doing the same things I'm asking you to do, even if I'm doing it in fancier armor than you are. And so that concept translates over to business management, and that is a strategy that some managers feel comfortable doing. I like that style of management, of leading from the front. I think it's important, if you do have a manager that feels that they need to lead from the front, don't deprogram from that. If that's how they feel they can lead, that's great. You just want to redirect that into the behaviors that they can lead from and the behaviors they should not be leading from. Process compliance and just in general following company SOPs, that's a great place for them to lead from the front. Showing up on time to work, following any sort of process, following time entry correctly, always having their timesheets submitted on time, making sure if they have to wear a uniform, their uniform is always the best looking uniform in the room. Anything they do touch, if they have to touch it, is always done beyond the standard for everybody else. Occasionally, that's how you lead from the front. Anytime they pick up the phone and talk to a client, they are the de facto best customer service agent in the room. Nobody can even come close to them. Those are all the things you want to encourage. But doing the work itself really isn't leading from the front. And if we go back to that general example, the general on the battlefield, literally when we're in the battle, which remember, a battle is back in ye olden times, this is a fairly short thing, a couple hours, 6 hours at most. Like, yes, the general is at the front of the charge in his gleaming armor on his fancy horse with his fancy sword, rides in first, kills a few people, but then in most medieval battles he leaves because he's the general, and if he gets killed, that's kind of a problem. And doesn't do the rest of the generaling there. And let's say he does. Let's say he finishes the fight. The general's not going to be the one that's literally digging all the trenches himself and everything. He may go do a few shovelfuls to show the men that, like, hey, this is how we shovel. But he's got to go be a general, not a troop. So I think that's a good way to frame it if you do have that manager that really feels that doing tickets is how they show the rest of the team the credibility and the validity of their role. Like, yeah, occasionally maybe dipping in a little bit, but if you're always doing tickets, you're not the manager, you're just one of the techs. And so it's important to make that distinction very, very, very clearly with the team, that while I am possibly capable of doing what you do, I don't need to, and I'm not supposed to, although I will still follow all the same processes and policies all of you follow, but even better than everyone. That's how you lead from the front. So I mentioned briefly, and I don't want to go too far into it in this video, but I mentioned briefly at the beginning of this, you likely promoted your best tech or most loyal employee to be the manager because they were your best employee, so they already exemplify what good looks like at your MSP. So of course, let's put them in charge. And I very quickly want to talk about that. It deserves a longer video. So there is a thing, it is called Peter Principle. There was an episode of Family Guy that made fun of this, if you want to look it up. But the idea of Peter Principle is that you have an employee who displays certain competencies and excellence. And as a result, that employee gets promoted to a new role, and they may continue to display competencies and excellence. But what often happens with most humans everywhere at all levels of any organization, this is not an MSP thing, this is any organization, most humans have a ceiling to their ability to be above average, to be excellent, right? We're not all infinitely good at everything. And so the idea of Peter principle is that you can over promote somebody into a role that they are no longer able to be excellent in. And so the example in Family Guy is they have a gumball machine, a literal gumball machine that was at a police station. So it's a police gumball machine, and they promote the gumball machine to be a traffic cop, right? Because he was such a good gumball machine. Let's give him a promotion. And he's a terrible traffic cop. Cars are crashing left and right because it's a gumball machine. It can't direct traffic. That's kind of the joke. The concept in Peter Principle is that you have this employee, in our case, a great tech, that we promote to be a manager, and suddenly they're not a very good tech or a good manager. It's not that that employee suddenly became a bad employee and they're checked out and they don't, they're dumb. It's you promoted them out of their ability to be excellent. They don't have the skill set and the experience to be that same level of excellent at being a manager that they were at being, whatever their role was previously. This won't be every employee. And you can absolutely overcome a lot of this with training and development, but it's something you need to be aware of as an owner. I see it. It's probably the second most common thing I see in coaching clients that they basically have done wrong and can't figure out why suddenly their service department is struggling, is they over promote their best technical employee to be a manager. Just kind of reminding all the owners everywhere, you as well as an owner at an MSP probably are not an all-star manager either. And I don't mean you're not trying your best, but you got into this because you were good at fixing computers, not because you were good at managing people, right? You didn't start an MSP to manage people. You started it to solve technology challenges. So there's a good chance that you already, as the owner, were Peter Principled yourself as the manager, which is why you've identified you need a new manager, right? You're like, I'm not really a great manager. I need someone to manage this for me, which is fantastic. Just have that same awareness that I think a lot of you have had about yourselves with the person that you are promoting. And if they don't naturally have that skill set, they're not going to magically figure it out. Definitely want to invest in getting them the requisite training and coaching they need to manage other people. And a lot of that training and coaching does not have to be MSP specific to start with. They just need to understand those basic tools and skills to be able to basically influence other people. Final thing before I leave you all with this idea of availability versus capacity. Having heard everything I said, does this mean that your service manager, since they need to be available, should basically have nothing on their schedule every day and should just sit there until something comes up? No, that is not what I am saying. I am not saying that they sit there and do nothing and only react to things. What I am saying is they need to have enough flexibility in their schedule so that they have the authority and accountability to reshuffle or drop whatever they're currently doing to focus on whatever needs their management attention. And in most MSPs, they cannot do that if they are also responsible for working service tickets, especially a regular queue of service tickets, because that's antithetical to the MSP model. No matter how you're delivering your MSP services, you and I both know that if your best tech blew off a client that only they could service for 3 days because they wanted to QC tickets, no one in that situation is happy. The client isn't happy, you're not happy, and that employee isn't happy. So what I am saying is you don't want to put them in that situation at all. Tickets can't be part of their normal expectations and responsibilities. They can occasionally jump into tickets when necessary. They can occasionally jump in and take things over if they are or were the lead tech and they're training the next person, but that can't be a normal responsibility. It cannot be an expectation. They are going to be there in a queue working tickets, that they have a certain percentage of tickets they have to hit, that they have a certain billability target they have to hit. That cannot be an expectation. That has to be icing on the cake that they do when they deem it is appropriate. And it's your job as their boss to rein it in and make sure that they are not spending too much time in their old comfort zone working tickets. They need to be able at any minute to have that wherewithal to say, I was going to go through and QC this project plan in an hour, but Timmy, I'm hearing you right now on the phone. You are struggling. I need to get in there, take over that phone call, get that client off the call, and spend the next 45 minutes with Timmy explaining to him exactly how he needs to work on remotely, I don't know, resizing those drives at the client, because the conversation I was hearing, that's a problem. Service manager needs to have that kind of availability. They cannot have that kind of availability if they're working client-facing tickets. Have a great Thursday, everybody. I love the fact that I'm seeing more discussion about more MSPs identifying that they need service managers and that the owners can't manage it themselves. So good for you if you've recognized that. Just make sure you don't put your manager in an unwinnable condition.